Good morning, everyone. This is Jamie out at Seven Stands Farm. It's a wet, dreary, snowy morning here, so I think it's the perfect time for us to go out and talk about how we keep our goats and our pigs warm. So hang out with me for a few minutes and we'll show you how we do it here on the farm. First off, I think one of the best ways to keep our animals warm is to choose the right goat or the right pig. I'm not necessarily saying that there is a right breed, but I'm saying that we need to pick animals that come from a system which resembles ours. If you're going to raise pastured pork, you need to buy pigs which come from a pasture-raised farm. And the same thing with goats. If you're going to raise meat goats out on pasture in the elements with just shelter and cover, then you need to buy animals that come from a system that resembles yours. However, I do feel like the myotonic breed is the best meat goat breed. They're a landrace breed, which means they're used to the elements or adapted to the elements and their surroundings of this area. So they're from America. They're not shipped in from another country, South Africa, like some of the other breeds. So that's why I chose them for my system. The second thing on my list that'll help keep our pigs and our goats warm in the winter is shelter and bedding. These kind of go hand in hand. It doesn't have to be a big barn like you kind of see in the background. I'm just fortunate that on this piece of property there was already a barn here and I get to utilize it, so that's been real good for me. But also here on the farm we use IBC totes and we use some calf hutches. So this is a calf hut. This is a 3-sided shelter, which it works out really good. You could use this for either the goats or the pigs. It's not super tall, which keeps the heat down close to the animals. It's got 3 sides on it, which shelters them from the wind. This one's not in use, but if it was, we would have a really deep bedding of straw or hay in here to help keep them warm. Another trick is just remember we get most of our wind out of the north, so we try to face them southward facing or some resemblance to southward facing, just to keep the wind from blowing directly in the front of the calf hutch or the shelter. So if you're going to build a shelter, think about which way your wind comes from and how you want to face it, and that'll help in keeping your animals warm during the winter as well. So let's also talk about the bedding that we have in this barn. It started out as just a layer of straw in the bottom. We just put a layer of straw down in the bottom, probably an inch or 2 thick. As the winter continues, I just feed them a bale of hay in different spots throughout the barn. They waste a little bit of it, but what happens is it becomes bedding and just adds to the bedding on the floor of the barn. As we continue to add the carbon from the hay, the urine, and the feces from the goats, we actually start a composting process. And that composting process of all this material in here actually begins to create heat itself. So it's almost like the goats are able to come in and lay down on a heated blanket. It really helps heat up the barn. And then each spring, I'll bring a tractor in, I'll scoop this out, we'll pile it up, make compost out of it. But it works really well. The deep bedding system works really well for the goats. It helps keep them warm and helps keep them dry as well. Today's bale of hay is back in the corner. They'll eat most of it. Part of it will get pulled out. It'll end up being bedding for them this afternoon. So we put out 2 to 3 bales a day in the barn, and that helps with their bedding and of course helps them with their diet. So the third tip, the last tip, but definitely not the least for keeping your animals warm in the winter, is feed. The way you feed them. Now this is where goats and pigs differ completely. Goats have to have these long fibers, and pigs need calories from grains. Goats have 4 stomachs, and the first one is called the ruminant. That's why they're called ruminant animals. And the way that works is, as you can see here, the goats are munching and swallowing those really long fibers of hay quickly. They don't chew them up into small pieces. They swallow them down into that first stomach, and when they get into that stomach, the digestion starts to take place. Really, in goats, it's called fermentation, but it's the same thing. It's their digestion process. As the fibers start to build up in the rumen, the microbes in that rumen start to break down those fibers, and that process is called fermentation. As that stuff begins to ferment inside their stomach, down in their rumen, in their gut, it actually is like the goat has its own furnace inside. It creates heat just like the compost does in the floor of our barns or our shelters. The composting here creates heat for them to lay on. The composting or the fermentation in the guts of these goats creates heat. It gives them their own internal furnace. So we need to make sure as goat owners that we're not feeding our goats just sacked grains or feeds in the wintertime, because that defeats the purpose. That turns off the microbes in the rumen and shuts down their internal furnace, which actually makes a goat colder in the winter, even though you're feeding more feed and calories. So make sure you're feeding your goats in the wintertime hay so that they can stay warm. So we've been mainly in the goat pasture talking about the goats. The first thing was choosing the right animal. Here's the pigs. You need to choose the right pigs just like the goats. I didn't choose these pigs specifically because their breed. They're actually a crossbreed of Hampshire, Yorkshire, and Duroc. And they came from Worsham Spring Farms. Tyler Leonard over there does a good job with those. But he raises his pigs on pasture. His mothers are on pasture, his boars are on pasture. So we bought pigs off of pasture to put on pasture. I didn't go and buy pigs out of a heated barn to bring and put on my pasture that would be out in the snow and wind. So just remember that with your pigs and your goats. Buy from a system which resembles yours. We're in the pig lot now. So back to housing. This is an IBC tote that I use for the pig housing. It's a 250, 300 gallon tank that a friend gave me. You can buy them relatively inexpensive here in my area, anywhere from $50 to $150, just according to where you get them from. These work really good for shelters, small shelters for small amounts of animals. As you can see, it's 3-sided as well. It's not really tall. It helps keep the heat down to where the pigs are at. I've got a deep bedding of straw in here, and pigs, they just pile in on top of each other and bury under the straw. Probably won't get the composting effect in here because they drag it out, as you can see, as they go in and out of it. But we make sure that we have a deep bedding in there. We add to it continuously as needed. So you just have to keep up with it and keep a good bedding of straw. We use straw in here. You could use hay. You might want to use wood shavings or wood chips, whatever your preference is. Again, face it away from your prevailing wind, whatever that is for you. You got a wonderful little shelter. Just took an angle grinder and cut the front out of it. Easy, easy shelter for pigs. I even got a couple of these that I use for goats. I said earlier, and I want to reiterate, the main difference between pigs and goats and keeping them warm in the winter is the feed. So let's talk a little bit about the pigs. The pigs are not ruminant animals. They create their heat. They get warm from moving. They get warm from burning those calories from their fat cover that they have. They make heat by burning calories. If you want your pigs to continue to grow during the winter and stay warm, you need to increase their caloric intake, or their amount of calories that they intake every day. If you feed your pigs once or twice a day, you may want to think about increasing the pounds per pig per day or scoop per pig per day, however it is that you feed them. Or you may want to think about just putting out a continuous feeder. That's what I do. That's the easiest for me. I put out a continuous feeder, which I keep full, and they always have the food there they need. That way they can take in enough food for their nutritional needs, continue a good rate of gain on muscle and fat, and keep making bacon for you and not just burning those calories to stay warm. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel. If you would, share this content with your homestead and farm friends. Hopefully I can help you and help them as well with a few tricks on how to keep your animals warm during the winter. And as always, we'll do it again tomorrow.